This week on 3D Archery, we're going to go over the most misunderstood term in archery today, the archer's paradox. Hey everybody, and welcome to the first joint video between Archery 101 and 3D Archery. Now, if you watch Archery 101, I already made a video on this, but it just drives me crazy. This subject is one of my pet peeves. So why am I covering the archer's paradox again? Well, it's pretty simple. I've been on the forums and on my YouTube channel. I converse with people and all. I actually call it more like debating. There are those that tell me I'm full of it. That's your right. But several times now, I've had people write to me telling me why, and they get real technical, and they're like laying everything down all precise, using all this science quote and all this stuff. And then they say this: well, when the arrow's in paradox, or during the first phase of paradox, you know, it's these statements that tell me the writer who's spouting all this stuff doesn't really understand it. Right? They're just repeating what they heard. It's not that they learned it or they understand it. They're just repeating it. And it's not them. It really isn't. What people call the archer's paradox has incorrectly become something else than what it was or what it should be. Right? And it belies a serious fundamental misunderstanding of what the archer's paradox is. All right? So it's become my personal quest, just like Clark Griswold in Vacation. This is not a vacation, this is a quest. We are here to put the point straight. And that's what I'm here to do, all right? So, that's why I'm making it. Everybody says it's this. Not everybody, but a good number of people say it's this. But guess what? It's actually this over here. And that's what we're about to cover. All right, everybody, before we get going, I'm going to give you the definition of archer's paradox. We're going to break it down, we're going to talk about it, show you where the confusion comes from and what it actually is. Putting on my reading glasses, yep, I'm getting old. The archer's paradox is the phenomenon of an arrow traveling in the direction it is pointed at, full draw. Bad English, but who cares? When it seems that the arrow would have to pass through the starting position it was in before being drawn, where it was pointed to the side of the target. Alright, that can be confusing. One, bad English, right? But I found this definition on Wikipedia and multiple other sites. Now, a couple things about it. One site did a really great job, and they said it's not really a paradox. It just appears to be one. Alright? So the next question comes is, why the confusion? Alright, everybody, we know the definition, so why is the confusion? Why does everybody think the archer's paradox is about the arrow, right? Well, let's look at the first line, and I think this is where it comes from. It says the archer's paradox is the phenomenon of an arrow traveling in the direction it's pointed at when at full draw. Got that? They talk about the arrow traveling, so that's the archer's paradox. But it's really not. Because how is this arrow traveling at the target a paradox, right? We know this arrow has to oscillate. We know that. So it's not a paradox. It's a known fact. So it cannot be a paradox. How do we know that an arrow has to flex or oscillate? Simple. Newton's laws of physics, right? Newton's first law states that an object will remain at rest or in a uniform motion in a straight line unless acted upon by an external force. It's at rest and in a straight line. The external force is the string pushing on it, right? That's our external force. Now, here's the next one that kicks in. Once this external force is being applied, inertia kicks in. Inertia is an object at rest tends to stay at rest, an object in motion tends to stay in motion. The front end, being heavier than the rear end, it resists the push. So when it pushes, this arrow has to do that. It has to flex. which brings us to the next law of physics, the third law. And that is, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. So, we apply an external force, inertia causes the arrow to flex. Third law, equal and opposite reaction. See how it flexes this way? That means it's going to go back and flex this way. That is what causes the oscillation. The oscillation is caused by an external force combined with inertia. And then it continues due to the third law. Now I ask you, how can this be a paradox? Right? We know this is going to happen. We understand and we know why it's going to happen. There is no paradox on this. Alright? It cannot be. The arrow bending is not a paradox. We know it. We understand it. Alright, now that I stated and I tried to tell you why the arrow cannot be in paradox, right? So what is paradox? Well, first, then you gotta know it's really not a paradox. It's a perceived one, right? And the key to understanding what is the archer's paradox is the name of it. What's the name? The archer's paradox. It's not the arrow's paradox. It's not the paradox of the bow. It's the archer's paradox. Alright? The paradox is what the archer perceives. It's not what really happens, it's what they perceive. Right? And what that is, it only happens on bows not cut to center. Right? Or cut to center a little bit. But if it's cut past center, there is no paradox. It only happens on bows not cut to center. And what that is with your riser, when you're at brace height, the arrow is pointing way off to the side. Now when you draw it back, the arrow is going to come back a little bit and get closer in line. But the paradox is that moment when you hold that bow up like this, you line your hand up with the target, your arrow is actually over here if you're shooting left-handed. That's the paradox. Now what I'm going to do for you is we're going to try to play with it and demonstrate it to you. I built a little rig. I'm going to put an arrow on it. I got a little laser pointer. And we're going to see where the laser points to show you what the paradox is. Alright? It's not that hard. It's not that complicated. But hopefully this visual will help you understand that the paradox is a perception of what the archer sees when they're holding their bow up at brace height. Alright everybody, don't mind the mess in my basement. Here's the first bow. I have two of them. And as you can see, this bow, not even close to being cut to center. It's an ambidextrous bow. And the beauty of it is, you can see the line in the center. Now, I'm going to put this on here. I'm going to put an arrow on it, and I have a laser point on the end of the arrow. It's going to show you where it's pointing. Now you're going to probably say, but how do we know where center is? Well, I got you covered in that too. I'm going to put a string on the center and run it straight out, and I'll line it with a laser, and we'll know where center should be and where the arrow's pointing at. Okay everybody, here it is. Now, know it's hard to see, but I'll zoom you in to show you the difference. Alright? There you go. So off to the left, that's the string where it's going, and there's that red dot right there, that red dot right there. That is where the arrow's pointing. Bring it back. So you can see that is the archer's paradox. What the archer sees, bring it over like that because that's probably close to what people are going to see, is the arrow is pointing off at an angle to where the target should, where you think it's going to hit. That's the paradox. It's the perceived paradox of the archer. Okay, everybody, let's measure it. 10 inches. Okay, now watch what happens when I draw the bow. See the red dot? Watch this. The arrow moves over. The paradox that you've seen is almost totally gone. Now watch. Look at the difference. At brace, full draw. That is why Archer's paradox only occurs when you're at brace height. All right, I'm going to try to demonstrate it again. See the string? That's running straight out. Look at the angle the arrow's at. That's the paradox. You know it's going to hit here, but your arrow's pointing there. But now, watch what happens when we pull it back to full draw. Take my bow. I don't trust nothing that I built. Draw. Now look at the arrow. It's pointing with the string. Bring it back. And look at the arrow. See the arrow go off the side? That's the paradox. It doesn't look like it's going to hit there, but when you pull it to full draw, woohoo, a knot came out. Pull it to full draw, it's in line. This, my friends, right here is the Archer's paradox. All right, everybody, now bow cut past center. Look how the string and the arrow aligns at brace. There is no paradox. So you can see here from this demonstration, a bow cut past center has no paradox. Now if I get fancy and schmancy and I start bumping in some, dialing in on this thingamabob here some people call a plunger, look now. Center, none. So there's the difference. Now it's no longer cut to center. I now have paradox. But to the modern magic of science, I crank it all the way back and in, and the paradox is gone. That, my friends, shows you there's no, oops, not all the way. There you go. Push my plunger in. Right? Paradox does not occur on bows cut past center. All right, everybody, let's wrap it all up. So you've seen the demonstrations, right? Hopefully you got a better visual of what Archer's paradox is. It's at brace height, not at full draw. It's at brace height. It's the difference between the two. You know, in layman's terms, best way to explain it is when you're at brace height, your arrow's not pointing at the target. That's it. But you know you're going to hit the target. That's the perceived paradox. One thing I forgot to cover is where this confusion comes from. It comes from a website. And the website, which a lot of people cite, is The Physics of Archery by Franco Normani. Now Franco admits he has no degree in physics. He just likes physics. And he reads on it and he likes how it's applied. All right? And he also tells you that he's looking at the oscillation of the arrow, which is the explanation of the paradox. And he uses that word, and that's a big difference. It's the explanation of the paradox, right? From a physics point of view. And he breaks it down into three phases. And that's what I hear people saying, well, phase one of the paradox. But that's not the paradox. The Archer's paradox, not the arrows, right? Big difference. And the guy even tells he's not talking from an archer. He was just trying to explain this. Right, he just used the wrong word for it at the beginning. All right, hope you like that. Archer's paradox. Let's get it right. Let's be paradox Nazis and correct people. Let's start using the proper terms out there. All right, hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you learned something. Don't forget to subscribe. And I'll see you next time with an all-new episode of 3D Archery or Archery 101.